Months pregnant, and she's unconscious. There's blood everywhere. I need an ambulance at the Mitchell penthouse. 400 Park Avenue, 42nd floor. Sir, I need you to stay calm. Is she breathing? Jake pressed his ear close to Sarah's pale lips. Her breath was shallow but present. Yes, barely. Please hurry. Just 12 hours earlier, Sarah Mitchell had been glowing with anticipation. The baby shower was supposed to be the perfect celebration, the culmination of what everyone believed was her fairy tale life. Married to Ryan Mitchell, the 34-year-old tech CEO whose startup had just been valued at $2 billion. Living in a Manhattan penthouse that graced magazine covers, expecting their first child. But fairy tales, Jake had always suspected, were just pretty lies told to make reality bearable. Sarah had been arranging white orchids in crystal vases when the first contraction hit. She'd dismissed it, laughing it off as Braxton Hicks. After all, she wasn't due for another month. The nursery was painted in soft blues and grays, the crib assembled, tiny clothes folded and waiting. Everything's perfect, she'd told herself, just as she'd been telling herself for months. The second contraction was stronger. Sarah doubled over, her hand instinctively protecting her swollen belly. When she looked down, her worst nightmare was spreading across the pristine white marble floor beneath her feet. Blood. Too much blood. She'd reached for her phone to call Ryan, but he was in Tokyo closing a major deal. At least, that's what his assistant had told her. His phone had gone straight to voicemail for the past 2 days, which wasn't unusual when he was in high-stakes negotiations. Hi, you've reached Ryan Mitchell. I'm currently in meetings that will change the world. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I've made history. Even his voicemail reeked of arrogance. But Sarah had fallen for that confidence 3 years ago when they'd met at a charity gala. He'd swept her off her feet with private jets, 5-star restaurants, and promises of a life she'd only seen in movies. The third contraction brought Sarah to her knees. The pain was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, radiating through her entire body like fire. She managed to dial Jake's number before everything went black. Jake had been installing kitchen cabinets for a client in Queens when Sarah's call came through. He'd heard her scream his name, then nothing but the sound of something hitting the floor. He'd broken every speed limit racing into Manhattan, his hands shaking as he used the emergency key Sarah had given him. Finding her unconscious in a pool of blood was the worst moment of his life. Now, as paramedics flooded the penthouse, Jake tried calling Ryan again. Voicemail. He tried Ryan's assistant, Bethany. I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez, but Mr. Mitchell is in crucial negotiations. He specifically requested no interruptions. Bethany, this is a medical emergency. Sarah's been rushed to the hospital. The baby might not make it. There was a pause. I'll try to reach him through the secure satellite connection, but it could take hours. Hours! Jake watched his sister being loaded onto a gurney, her face the color of paper, oxygen mask covering her nose and mouth. Her husband was unreachable while she fought for her life. At Mount Sinai Hospital, Dr. Amelia Thompson delivered news that hit like physical blows. Severe placental abruption, massive internal bleeding, emergency cesarean section required immediately. We need to operate now, Doctor, Thompson explained, her dark eyes kind but urgent. The baby is in distress, and Sarah's losing too much blood. I won't lie to you. This is touch and go. Jake signed the consent forms with trembling hands. He was listed as Sarah's emergency contact, a role that should have belonged to her husband. As Sarah disappeared behind operating room doors, Jake sat alone in the sterile waiting area, still trying to reach Ryan. Call after call went to voicemail. Something was wrong. Ryan Mitchell was many things, most of them unpleasant, but he wasn't careless with communication. His entire fortune was built on being available to investors and clients 24/7. The idea that he'd be completely unreachable during a genuine emergency felt impossible, unless he wasn't where he claimed to be. Jake had never liked Ryan, but he'd kept his mouth shut for Sarah's sake. She'd been so happy, so in love with the life Ryan provided, the penthouse, the designer clothes, the social events where she mingled with Manhattan's elite. She'd given up her marketing career to be the perfect wife, just as Ryan had asked. But Jake remembered the subtle changes over the past year, how Sarah had become quieter, more careful with her words, How she'd stopped talking about her own dreams and focused entirely on Ryan's ambitions. How she'd started asking permission for things she used to decide for herself. The operation lasted 5 hours. When Dr. Thompson finally emerged, her scrubs were stained with blood, but she was smiling. Sarah's stable. It was close, but she's going to make it. And your nephew. She paused. He's small, but he's a fighter. 4 pounds, 2 ounces. He'll need to stay in the NICU for a while, but his vitals are strong. Jake felt tears of relief streaming down his face. Can I see them? Sarah's still unconscious, but you can see the baby. Arthur Mitchell was tiny, barely visible among the tubes and wires in his incubator, but he was breathing, his miniature chest rising and falling steadily. Jake pressed his palm against the warm plastic and made a silent promise to his nephew. Your mom's going to be okay, little guy, and I'm going to make sure your dad gets here, even if I have to drag him back myself. But first, Jake needed to find out where Ryan Mitchell really was. Jake's friend Marcus Webb looked nothing like a private investigator. In his jeans and Yankees hoodie, he could have been any software engineer grabbing coffee in Midtown Manhattan. But Marcus specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found, and his success rate was legendary among divorce lawyers and suspicious spouses. You sure you want to know what I might find? Marcus asked, stirring his espresso as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. Sometimes the truth is worse than wondering. My sister almost died yesterday. Her husband claims he's in Tokyo, but something doesn't feel right. Marcus pulled out his laptop. Ryan Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Technologies. Private jet, tail number November 787. Romeo Mike. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing flight tracking databases that weren't available to the general public. Well, this is interesting. According to the FAA flight plan, November 787. Romeo Mike was supposed to fly to Tokyo 3 days ago. Supposed to. The flight plan was filed, but it was amended twice. First to Vancouver, then to Los Cabos, Mexico. The jet landed at Los Cabos International Airport yesterday at 2:15 p.m. Jake felt his blood pressure spike. Mexico. He told Sarah he was in Tokyo. Gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Marcus turned his laptop screen toward Jake. Immigration records show 2 passengers on that flight, Ryan Mitchell and Vanessa Cole. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Vanessa Cole was Ryan's business partner, a 26-year-old former model who joined Mitchell Technologies as head of strategic development. Sarah had mentioned her before, always with a slight tension in her voice. She's brilliant, Sarah had said once. Ryan says she has vision that most people can't understand. Sometimes I feel so ordinary compared to her. Jake had wanted to shake his sister. Sarah had a master's degree in marketing from Columbia and had built 3 successful campaigns for Fortune 500 companies before she'd married Ryan. But Ryan had a talent for making everyone around him feel smaller. Can you find out where they're staying? Jake asked. Marcus's fingers danced across the keyboard again. Resort Esperanza. Presidential suite. Booked for 5 days under the name Cole. Jake stared at the screen showing the luxury resort's website. Vanessa and Ryan were lounging by an infinity pool while Sarah fought for her life in a hospital bed. I need photos, Jake said quietly. Jake, think about this. Once you have proof, there's no going back. Your sister's world is going to implode. Her world already imploded. She just doesn't know it yet. Marcus nodded grimly. I have a contact in Cabo, professional photographer who does work for celebrity magazines. He can be discreet when the price is right. Money's not an issue. I want everything. Photos, videos, receipts, witness statements. I want enough evidence to bury him. Within 6 hours, Marcus's contact had delivered. The photos were devastating in their clarity. Ryan and Vanessa walking hand in hand along a private beach. Vanessa feeding Ryan strawberries at a candlelit dinner. Ryan kissing Vanessa's neck as she laughed, her head thrown back in genuine joy. But the most damaging photo showed them at the resort's spa. Ryan's wedding ring clearly visible on the table beside them as a masseuse worked on his shoulders. Vanessa was in the frame, her engagement ring catching the light. Engagement ring. Jake zoomed in on the image, his heart pounding. The ring was massive, at least 5 carats, in a setting he'd never seen Sarah wear. Marcus. When did Ryan propose to Sarah? According to public records, 2.5 years ago. Why? Because he proposed to someone else last week. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture uglier than Jake had imagined. This wasn't just an affair. Ryan was planning to leave Sarah, probably had been planning it for months. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Wait until after the baby was born, then disappear with his millions and his young girlfriend. Except Sarah had nearly died, and the timeline had accelerated. Jake's phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Thompson. Sarah's awake and asking for you. She wants to know about Ryan. Jake looked at the photos spread across Marcus's laptop screen, evidence of a betrayal so calculated and cruel it took his breath away. His sister was lying in a hospital bed, worried about her husband who was supposed to be in Tokyo for business. She had no idea he was in Mexico with another woman, planning a new life that didn't include her. Keep digging, Jake told Marcus. I have a feeling this goes deeper than just an affair. What are you going to tell Sarah? Jake closed his eyes, thinking of his sister's face when she'd shown him her engagement ring 3 years ago. She'd been radiant with happiness, convinced she'd found her fairy tale ending. Not yet. She's too weak. But soon, she's going to need to know the truth. As Jake walked back toward Sarah's room, he wondered if the truth would give her strength or destroy what was left of her world. Either way, she deserved better than living in a lie. And Ryan Mitchell was about to learn that destroying Jake Rodriguez's family was the biggest mistake of his life. In her hospital room, Sarah was sitting up for the first time since the surgery, her face pale but alert. The moment she saw Jake, her first words were about her husband. Have you reached Ryan? He must be so worried. I know how important this Tokyo deal is, but I need him here. Jake sat down beside her bed, taking her hand. It felt so small and fragile in his. Sarah, we need to talk. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions as Jake showed her the photos on Marcus's laptop. First confusion, then disbelief, then a kind of hollow shock that was worse than screaming would have been. That's not possible, she whispered, staring at the image of Ryan kissing Vanessa on the beach. He's in Tokyo. There has to be an explanation. Jake wished there was. He'd spent the past 2 hours hoping Marcus had made a mistake, that there was some innocent reason Ryan Mitchell was in Mexico with another woman while his wife fought for her life. But the evidence was overwhelming. Credit card receipts for romantic dinners, hotel records showing they'd shared the presidential suite, a video of Ryan feeding Vanessa cake by the pool, both of them laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Sarah, look at this one. Jake pointed to the photo of Vanessa's engagement ring. When did Ryan give you a ring like that? Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her own wedding set, a modest 3-carat diamond that had seemed enormous 3 years ago. Compared to Vanessa's ring, it looked almost ordinary. He never did. I've never seen that ring before. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah stared at the laptop screen for a long moment, then closed it gently. I need to see Arthur, she said finally. Sarah, we should talk about this. We should call a lawyer. I need to see my son. Jake helped Sarah into a wheelchair, recognizing the tone in her voice. It was the same determined quiet she'd used when their father left when they were kids, when she'd decided to put herself through college waiting tables, when she'd built her marketing career from nothing. Sarah Mitchell might have spent 3 years playing the role of pampered wife, but Jake was seeing glimpses of the fighter his sister had always been. In the NICU, Sarah pressed her hands against Arthur's incubator and began to cry. But these weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of rage. He knew, she said softly. When I called him 2 days ago to tell him I wasn't feeling well, he knew he was going to Mexico with her. He kissed me goodbye that morning, knowing he was going to propose to someone else. Jake watched his sister's face transform. The naive woman who trusted blindly was disappearing, replaced by someone harder and more focused. How long do you think this has been going on? Sarah asked. Marcus is still digging, but based on the flight records, they've taken at least 6 trips together in the past year. Always when Ryan told you he was traveling for business. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, her hand resting on Arthur's incubator. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. I want to know everything, every trip, every lie, every dollar he spent on her. I want receipts, photos, bank records, everything. Sarah, maybe you should focus on recovering first. This can wait. No, it can't. Sarah turned to face him, and Jake saw a steel in her eyes he'd never seen before. Because he's going to come back eventually, and he's going to have explanations for everything. He's going to make me feel crazy for doubting him. He's going to turn this around and make it my fault somehow. Jake recognized the truth in that. Ryan had a talent for manipulation, for making other people question their own perceptions. Sarah had become quieter over the past year, second-guessing herself, asking Ryan's opinion on decisions she'd once made independently. But if I have proof, if I have evidence he can't deny or explain away, then I have power. What are you going to do? Sarah looked back at Arthur, sleeping peacefully despite the machines keeping him alive. I'm going to protect my son, and I'm going to make sure Ryan Mitchell pays for every single lie he's told. A nurse approached them with news that would complicate everything. Mrs. Mitchell, your mother-in-law is here to see you. She's quite insistent. Margaret Mitchell swept into the NICU like a force of nature, all silver hair and designer clothes and barely contained fury. She looked at Sarah with the same expression someone might use to examine a disappointing piece of merchandise. Sarah, I came as soon as I heard. Her voice was crisp and cold. This is a disaster of epic proportions. Hello. Margaret, I'm recovering well. Thank you for asking. Your grandson is fighting for his life, but he's stable. Margaret barely glanced at Arthur's incubator. Where is Ryan? I've been trying to reach him for 12 hours. Jake and Sarah exchanged glances. Margaret clearly didn't know about Cabo, which meant Ryan hadn't told his family about his travel plans either. He's in Tokyo, Sarah said carefully, supposedly unreachable due to sensitive negotiations. Supposedly, Margaret's eyes sharpened. What does that mean? This was the moment. Sarah could tell Margaret the truth, drag the whole family into the scandal. Or she could wait, gather more evidence, be strategic about her next move. Sarah chose strategy. Nothing. I'm sure he'll call as soon as he can. But Margaret wasn't buying it. She'd built a fortune alongside her late husband by reading people, and she was reading something in Sarah's tone that she didn't like. I'll be staying in the city until this situation is resolved, Margaret announced. We need to control the narrative before the press gets wind of this. Control the narrative, Jake stepped forward. Your daughter-in-law almost died. Your grandson is in intensive care. What narrative needs controlling? Margaret looked at Jake like he was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. The Mitchell family has been building its reputation for 3 generations. We don't air our problems in public, and we certainly don't give ammunition to our competitors. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Margaret, what are you saying? I'm saying that when Ryan returns, we present a united front, a medical emergency, handled with grace and privacy. The family pulled together during a crisis. That's the story. And what if that's not the story? Margaret's smile was cold as winter. Then we'll have problems? Sarah, problems you're not equipped to handle. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Margaret Mitchell was putting Sarah on notice. Play along with the family version of events, or face the consequences. After Margaret left, Sarah sat in stunned silence. She'd always known Ryan's mother was controlling, but she'd never felt the full force of that control directed at her. She knows, Sarah said finally. Maybe not the details, but she knows something's wrong, which means we need to be careful. Margaret Mitchell didn't build an empire by playing fair. Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She was fighting on 2 fronts now. Ryan's betrayal was personal, but Margaret's threat was strategic. The Mitchell family would protect their reputation at any cost, even if it meant destroying Sarah in the process. Marcus needs to work faster, Sarah said. Before Ryan comes back and before Margaret figures out what we know. What's the rush? Sarah looked at Arthur, so small and vulnerable in his incubator, surrounded by machines keeping him alive. Because they're going to try to take my son away from me, and I need ammunition before they fire the first shot. The war for Sarah's future had begun, and she was finally ready to fight. Ryan Mitchell returned to New York like a conquering hero, all-concerned husband and devoted father. He burst into Sarah's hospital room carrying an enormous bouquet of white roses and wearing an expression of perfectly calibrated worry. My God, Sarah. I came as soon as I got word. The satellite communications were completely down. I had no idea anything was wrong. Sarah watched her husband's performance with new eyes. 3 days of evidence gathering had taught her to recognize his lies. The slight pause before certain words, the way he touched his temple when he was fabricating details, the overly specific explanations for things no one had questioned. "You look tired," she said simply. "Exhausted. I barely slept on the flight back. How are you feeling?" "How's our son?" Ryan moved to kiss her forehead, but Sarah turned her head slightly, so his lips brushed her cheek instead. A small gesture, but it spoke volumes. "Arthur's stable. The doctors say he'll need to stay in the NICU for several more weeks. I want to see him immediately." "Of course you do." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly at her tone, but before he could respond, Margaret Mitchell entered the room with her usual commanding presence. "Ryan, finally, we have significant issues to discuss." "Mother, I just got back. Can't this wait?" "No, it cannot." Margaret's gaze flickered to Sarah, then back to Ryan. "Perhaps we should speak privately. Anything you need to say to Ryan, you can say in front of me." Sarah interrupted. "I'm his wife." The silence that followed was loaded with meaning. Margaret and Ryan exchanged glances, some kind of communication passing between them that Sarah couldn't read. "Very well," Margaret said finally. "Ryan, the board is asking questions about your extended absence. 3 board members have called me personally, concerned about leadership stability during the Henderson acquisition. The Henderson deal can wait. My family comes first." Sarah felt a bitter laugh bubble up in her throat. Ryan's definition of family apparently didn't include the wife and son he'd abandoned for a romantic getaway. "There's also the matter of press interest," Margaret continued. "Someone leaked information about Sarah's hospitalization. Page 6 is running a story tomorrow about the Mitchell heir being born under emergency circumstances." "How did they find out?" Margaret's eyes fixed on Sarah. "An excellent question. Hospital staff are bound by confidentiality agreements. Family members, however, might have different loyalties." The accusation was clear. Margaret was suggesting Sarah or Jake had leaked the story, which was absurd but effective. It put Sarah on the defensive and shifted focus away from Ryan's absence. "I haven't spoken to any reporters," Sarah said firmly. "Of course not," Ryan said quickly. "Mother, Sarah's been through a trauma. She doesn't need accusations." But Sarah caught the look that passed between Ryan and Margaret. They were working together, testing her reactions, probing for weaknesses. "I'd like some time alone with my husband," Sarah said. "We haven't had a chance to really talk since he got back." Margaret hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Ryan alone with Sarah, but refusing would have seemed obviously suspicious. "Of course, dear. Ryan, we'll finish our discussion later." Once they were alone, Ryan sat down beside Sarah's bed and took her hand. His touch felt cold despite the warmth of his skin. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here," he said softly. "If I'd known what was happening, I would have caught the first flight home." "Tell me about Tokyo." Ryan's hand tensed slightly around hers. "What do you want to know? Everything. The deal, the meetings, where you stayed. I was so worried about you when I couldn't reach you. The negotiations were incredibly complex. We were working with 3 different time zones, and the Japanese executives were very particular about communication security. All phones had to be surrendered during sessions. Ryan was good at lying. Each detail sounded plausible individually, but Sarah now knew he'd never been to Tokyo, had never surrendered his phone, had never been out of communication for any legitimate business reason. "That sounds stressful. You'll have to tell me more about it later." "Of course, but right now, I just want to focus on you and Arthur. Nothing else matters." Sarah squeezed his hand, playing the role of grateful wife while her mind cataloged every lie. She was learning to be as deceptive as he was, and the thought should have bothered her more than it did. That afternoon, while Ryan was meeting with his lawyers about some urgent business matter, Jake brought Sarah disturbing news. Marcus found something. Vanessa Cole isn't who she claims to be. Sarah looked up from the breast pump she'd been using to provide milk for Arthur. "What do you mean her background doesn't check out? The college she claims to have attended has no record of her. Her previous employment history is fabricated. Even her social security number is suspicious. How is that possible? Identity theft is easier than people think, especially if you have money and connections. Marcus thinks Vanessa Cole might not even be her real name." Sarah felt a chill of genuine fear. If she's not who she claims to be, Then what does she want with Ryan? That's what we're trying to figure out. But Sarah, this goes way beyond a simple affair. Someone went to enormous trouble to create a false identity and get close to your husband. That suggests a long-term plan. Before Sarah could process this information fully, Dr. Thompson entered with news that changed everything. Sarah, I need to discuss Arthur's condition with you and your husband. Ryan's in meetings. Can you tell me, Doctor? Thompson hesitated. Normally I would wait for both parents, but given the circumstances, I think you should know. Arthur's doing better than expected. Much better. His lung development is ahead of schedule, and his weight gain has been excellent. Sarah smiled, feeling hope for the first time in days. That's wonderful news, it is. In fact, he's progressing so well that we might be able to move him out of intensive care within the week. And potentially, he could be ready to go home in 2 to 3 weeks rather than the 6 to 8 we initially estimated. Really, that's incredible. There is one thing, though. I've received a call from your insurance company. Apparently, someone has been asking detailed questions about Arthur's prognosis and treatment timeline. Someone from the insurance company. No, that's what's strange. The insurance company called to ask if we'd spoken to anyone claiming to represent the family's interests. Someone called them asking about potential long-term care costs and disability assessments. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Who would ask about that, I don't know. But I wanted you to be aware. Sometimes in high-profile families, there can be concerns about financial planning around medical situations. After Dr. Thompson left, Sarah sat in stunned silence. Someone was asking about Arthur's potential disabilities and long-term care costs. Someone was planning for a scenario where Arthur might not be healthy. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll lose everything. This is your only warning. Sarah showed the message to Jake when he returned. We need to accelerate the timeline, Jake said grimly. They know we're investigating. You think Ryan and Margaret are behind this? Or Vanessa? Whoever she really is. Sarah, I think you need to consider the possibility that this entire situation is more dangerous than we realized. Sarah looked toward the NICU, where Arthur was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his future was being negotiated by people who saw him as either an asset or a liability. Then we need to be smarter than they are, Sarah said quietly, and we need to move fast. The gentle woman who trusted blindly was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, more calculating, and absolutely determined to protect her child at any cost. The real war was just beginning. Elena Vasquez was everything Margaret Mitchell wasn't: warm, fierce, and completely unimpressed by wealth or social status. At 38, she'd built her reputation as Manhattan's most effective divorce attorney by refusing to be intimidated by powerful men and their expensive legal teams. Your case is a nightmare, Elena told Sarah bluntly as they sat in her midtown office. But it's a nightmare with potential. Sarah had been discharged from the hospital that morning, though Arthur would need to stay in the NICU for another week. She'd moved into a hotel near the hospital, claiming she wanted to be close to their son. The truth was, she couldn't bear the thought of returning to the penthouse where she'd collapsed, where every room held memories of the life she'd thought she was living. The good news is that adultery gives us leverage in New York, especially when combined with potential fraud, Elena continued. The bad news is that you signed a prenuptial agreement that's bulletproof under normal circumstances. What makes circumstances abnormal if we can prove the marriage was entered into under false pretenses? Or if we can demonstrate that Ryan was already engaged in deceptive practices when you signed the agreement, we might be able to avoid it entirely. Sarah felt a spark of hope. Marcus has been documenting Ryan's trips with Vanessa going back 18 months. That predates Arthur's conception. That's helpful. But we need more. We need financial records showing deception, evidence of hidden assets, proof that Ryan was planning to leave you while keeping you in the dark about the family's true financial situation. How do we get that kind of evidence? Elena smiled, and there was something predatory in it. We make him think he's won, then we watch him get careless. The plan Elena outlined was risky but brilliant. Sarah would play the role of defeated wife, grateful for whatever settlement Ryan was willing to offer. Meanwhile, Elena's team would conduct forensic accounting of Mitchell Technologies while Marcus continued investigating Vanessa Cole's true identity. The key is making them believe you're not a threat, Elena explained. Rich men like Ryan assume women like you will accept whatever they're given, rather than fight and risk ending up with nothing. What if they're right? What if I fight and lose everything? Then you'll lose everything with your dignity intact, and your son knowing his mother was brave enough to fight for him. That evening, Sarah returned to the penthouse for the first time since her collapse. Ryan was waiting with champagne and takeout from her favorite restaurant, playing the attentive husband perfectly. "I thought we should celebrate," he said, pouring champagne into crystal flutes. "Arthur's doing so well, and you're finally home." "This is thoughtful," Sarah said, accepting the glass but not drinking from it. She'd noticed Ryan's generosity always coincided with his guilt over something. "I've been thinking about our future, about what kind of life we want to build for Arthur." Oh, Ryan sat down beside her on the white leather sofa where they'd planned their wedding 3 years ago. "I know this has been difficult, and I know my traveling puts strain on our marriage. I'm thinking about restructuring my responsibilities at the company." "What do you mean promoting Vanessa to Chief Operating Officer? She's been handling more of the day-to-day operations anyway, and she's incredibly capable. It would free me up to spend more time with you and Arthur." Sarah's stomach churned. Ryan was essentially offering to promote his mistress while pretending it was a sacrifice for his family. That sounds like a big responsibility for someone so young. Age doesn't matter when you have vision. Vanessa sees the future of technology in ways that most people can't comprehend. I'm sure she does. Ryan missed the sarcasm entirely, too caught up in his own narrative. "Actually, I was thinking you might like to meet her properly. She's been asking about you, worried about your health." The audacity was breathtaking. Ryan was suggesting Sarah befriend the woman he was planning to leave her for. "Maybe once I'm feeling stronger." Of course, there's no rush. Ryan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with an expression Sarah recognized. It was the same look he got when Vanessa texted him, a mixture of anticipation and secretive pleasure. "I should take this. Business emergency." Ryan stepped out onto the terrace to take his call, and Sarah could hear fragments of conversation through the glass doors. Not business talk, but intimate laughter, whispered endearments, the sound of a man talking to someone he loved. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral again. "Sorry about that. Crisis averted. I'm tired. I think I'll go to bed early." "Of course, you need your rest." Ryan kissed her forehead with the same detached affection he might show a sister, then disappeared into his home office to work. Sarah lay in their king-size bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the muffled sound of Ryan's voice as he continued his conversation with Vanessa. She was sharing a bed with a stranger who was systematically dismantling their life while pretending to care about her recovery. The next morning brought what seemed like victory. Elena called with news that made Sarah's heart race with excitement. "We got them. Mitchell Technologies has been moving money through offshore accounts for the past 2 years. Shell companies, hidden assets, tax avoidance schemes that border on fraud. How much money? Conservative estimate, $50 million that should have been declared as marital assets. We can void the prenup and go after half of everything, including the hidden accounts." Sarah felt dizzy with relief. "So I can protect Arthur's future. More than that, you can make sure Ryan faces consequences for his deception. I'm filing papers this afternoon." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt genuinely hopeful. She had evidence of Ryan's affair, proof of financial deception, and a legal team ready to fight for her rights. She was going to win. That afternoon, she visited Arthur in the NICU with news that felt like a victory lap. "Mommy's going to make sure you're protected. Sweetheart, Daddy thought he could lie to us, but he was wrong." Arthur seemed to be listening, his tiny fingers wrapped around Sarah's pinky as she spoke. "Doctor." Thompson had said he could probably go home within the week, and Sarah was already planning their new life. Maybe a house in Westchester with a yard where Arthur could play. Maybe she'd go back to work, rebuild the career she'd abandoned to be Ryan's wife. She was mentally redecorating when her phone rang. Elena's number. "Sarah, we have a problem. A big one." "What kind of problem?" "All of our evidence just disappeared. The offshore accounts have been closed and the money transferred to legitimate Mitchell Technologies holdings. The shell companies have been dissolved. Every single piece of financial evidence we had is gone." Sarah felt the room start to spin. How is that possible? Someone tipped them off. Someone who knew exactly what we were looking for and exactly where to look for it. Who would know that there was a long pause? "Sarah, I need you to think carefully. Who else knew about our investigation? Who else had access to our strategy? Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities, then settled on the most horrifying answer. You think there's a spy in your office? No, Elena said grimly. I think there's a spy much closer to home. The victory Sarah had been celebrating crumbled to ash in her mouth. Someone she trusted had betrayed her. And now Ryan was not only free from consequences, but aware that she'd been fighting back. She was more vulnerable now than she'd ever been. And the people she was fighting against knew she was no longer playing the role of naive victim. The war had just escalated, and Sarah was losing badly. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow as she stood in the NICU, watching Arthur sleep. There were only 3 people who'd known the full extent of Elena's investigation: Jake, Marcus, and Dr. Thompson. Jake was impossible. He'd been her protector since childhood, the person who'd found her bleeding on the penthouse floor, the one who'd initiated the investigation in the first place. Marcus was a professional with a reputation to protect. Betraying a client would destroy his career, which left Dr. Thompson. Sarah's hands were shaking as she pulled up Dr. Thompson's personnel file on her phone. Harvard Medical School, prestigious residency at Johns Hopkins, 5 years at Mount Sinai with glowing reviews from patients and colleagues. But buried in the biographical details, Sarah found a connection that made her blood run cold. Dr. Thompson had done her residency under Dr. Richard Mitchell, Margaret's late brother-in-law. The Mitchell family had been funding her research into neonatal care for the past 3 years. Dr. Thompson walked into the NICU at that moment, her usual warm smile in place. Sarah, how are you feeling today? I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Dr. Thompson's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught a flicker of wariness in her eyes. Of course. Are you reporting Arthur's medical information to the Mitchell family, Sarah? I would never violate patient confidentiality. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched between them. Doctor. Thompson looked at Arthur, then back at Sarah, and something shifted in her demeanor. The Mitchell family has been generous supporters of this hospital's neonatal research program, she said carefully. They take a natural interest in ensuring their grandson receives the best possible care. By having his doctor spy on his mother, I prefer to think of it as providing comprehensive family support. Sarah felt sick. What have you told them? Nothing that wasn't in Arthur's best interests? What have you told them, doctor? Thompson's facade of warmth finally cracked. They were concerned about your mental state, the stress of premature birth, the financial pressures, the isolation from your support network. I provided reassurance that you were coping well. Financial pressures. What financial pressures, Sarah? I assumed you knew. Your insurance coverage has been canceled. The bills for Arthur's NICU care are being paid directly by Mitchell Technologies as a charitable contribution. Sarah stared at her in shock. When was my insurance canceled? 3 days ago, according to the paperwork I received. 3 days ago. The same day Ryan had returned from Mexico. The same day Margaret had arrived in New York. They'd cut off Sarah's insurance immediately, ensuring she'd be financially dependent on their charity to pay for Arthur's medical care. You've been reporting everything to them, haven't you? My conversations with lawyers, my questions about Arthur's prognosis, even my medical information. Dr. Thompson had the grace to look ashamed. Sarah, you have to understand. The Mitchell family has funded millions of dollars in research that has saved countless babies' lives. When they asked for updates on Arthur's care, I thought I was helping ensure he received the best treatment, while helping them destroy his mother. I never meant for it to go that far, but it has, hasn't it? How long have you been reporting to them since Arthur was born? They were concerned about his development, about potential complications that might affect the family's financial planning. Sarah felt everything clicking into place. The mysterious calls about Arthur's long-term care costs, the insurance cancellation, the perfectly timed disappearance of evidence Elena had been gathering. The Mitchell family had been orchestrating every move, using Sarah's trust in her son's doctor against her. What else have you told them, doctor? Thompson looked at the floor. I may have mentioned that you'd been asking questions about Ryan's whereabouts during your hospitalization, and that you'd consulted with a divorce attorney. You may have mentioned it, Sarah. Please understand, I thought I was protecting Arthur's interests. The Mitchell family made it clear that family stability was crucial for his long-term well-being. Sarah wanted to scream, but Arthur was sleeping peacefully just feet away, and she wouldn't disturb her son's rest even for this betrayal. "Get out," she said quietly. "Get out and don't come back. I want a different doctor assigned to Arthur immediately." "Sarah, that might not be possible. I'm the attending neonatologist, and Arthur's care is quite complex. Then I'll transfer him to a different hospital. The Mitchell family has made substantial donations to this hospital's NICU. I don't think administration would approve a transfer without their consent." The trap was complete. Arthur needed specialized care that was expensive and complex. The Mitchell family was paying for that care while simultaneously using their financial leverage to control every aspect of the situation. Sarah couldn't move Arthur without their permission, couldn't even change doctors without their approval. She was financially trapped, medically trapped, and legally outmaneuvered by people who'd been planning this campaign while she'd been playing the role of grateful wife. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan having dinner with Mother tonight to discuss Arthur's future. "Join us at the Union Club at 8 p.m. Wear something nice." A command, not an invitation. Sarah was being summoned to hear the terms of her surrender. She looked at Arthur, so small and vulnerable in his incubator, completely dependent on machines that the Mitchell family was paying for. They'd engineered a situation where fighting for her rights meant risking her son's health care. But as Sarah stared at her sleeping baby, she felt something hardening in her chest. The Mitchell family might control the money, the doctors, and the legal system, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated what a mother would do to protect her child. Sarah texted back, "I'll be there." Then she called Jake. "I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy. What I need you to kidnap my son." The final battle was about to begin, and Sarah was done playing by rules written by her enemies. The Union Club hadn't changed in over a century, and Margaret Mitchell belonged there the way oil paintings belonged in gilded frames. She sat at a corner table in the oak-paneled dining room, every inch the Manhattan matriarch in her Chanel suit and pearl necklace. Ryan stood when Sarah approached, playing the attentive husband for the benefit of other diners. But his kiss on her cheek was cold, and his hand on her arm was more possessive than protective. "Sarah, you look lovely," Margaret said, though her tone suggested the opposite. "Please, sit. We have important matters to discuss." Sarah sat down carefully, hyper-aware of the recording device Jake had helped her conceal in her purse. Whatever happened in this conversation, she wanted evidence. "First," Margaret continued, "I want you to know how pleased we are with Arthur's progress. Dr. Thompson speaks very highly of his development." "Does she?" Sarah said flatly. "The medical bills are quite substantial, of course, nearly $200,000 so far, with several more weeks of intensive care required. Fortunately, Mitchell Technologies has been happy to cover these expenses." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Arthur's life depended on Mitchell family generosity, and that generosity could be withdrawn at any time. "We're grateful," Sarah said, playing the role expected of her. "I'm sure you are. Which brings us to our proposal." Ryan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Sarah, we've all been through a traumatic experience. Arthur's premature birth, your difficult recovery, the stress of medical uncertainty. It's taken a toll on everyone. I'm feeling much better. Physically, perhaps, but emotionally, you've been under enormous strain. It's perfectly understandable." Sarah felt a chill. "What are you saying?" Margaret answered. "We're saying that perhaps it would be best for everyone, especially Arthur, if you took some time to focus on your recovery." "What kind of time?" "There's an excellent facility in Switzerland," Ryan said smoothly. "Completely private, world-class medical care, beautiful scenery. You could rest, recover from your trauma, get the help you need." "Help with what? The depression?" Margaret said matter-of-factly. "The postpartum psychosis that Dr. Thompson has been documenting in Arthur's medical file." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. "I don't have postpartum psychosis." "Of course you don't think you do," Ryan said with practiced sympathy. "That's one of the symptoms. Dr. Thompson has been quite concerned about your paranoid delusions, your accusations against hospital staff, your obsession with my business travel. Those aren't delusions. Darling, you accused me of lying about being in Tokyo. You hired private investigators to follow me. You've been claiming that our son's doctor is part of some conspiracy against you. Every word was technically true, but stripped of context. Sarah's reasonable suspicions sounded like the ravings of a mentally ill woman. I have proof. Proof of what Margaret asked. That your husband was in Tokyo closing a deal worth $50 million to Mitchell Technologies. That doctor, Thompson, has been providing excellent care for your son, that a team of lawyers has been working around the clock to ensure your family's financial security. Sarah realized with growing horror that they'd rewritten the entire narrative. Ryan's trip to Mexico had been scrubbed from existence, replaced with fabricated evidence of successful business negotiations in Tokyo. The financial crimes Elena had discovered had been covered up so thoroughly that questioning them would seem delusional. You see, Ryan continued, we understand that you're not thinking clearly right now. The trauma of nearly losing Arthur has affected your perception of reality. But we can get you help. And while I'm getting help, Arthur will be in the best possible hands, Margaret said. Ryan and I will ensure he receives everything he needs. For how long? However long it takes for you to recover. Sarah understood. They were offering her a choice between voluntary commitment to a psychiatric facility or involuntary commitment via court order. Either way, Arthur would be raised by the Mitchell family while Sarah was declared mentally incompetent. I need to think about this. Of course, Ryan said, but don't take too long. Doctor, Thompson is required to report her concerns about your mental state to Child Protective Services if she believes Arthur is at risk. Another threat wrapped in concern. If Sarah didn't voluntarily commit herself, Doctor, Thompson would file a report that could result in Arthur being taken away entirely. I understand. Good. We'll arrange for transport to Switzerland tomorrow evening. The facility is expecting you. Sarah nodded, playing the role of defeated woman accepting her fate. But inside, she was calculating timing and angles and risks, because Jake wasn't kidnapping Arthur. That had never been the real plan. The real plan was much more dangerous, and it was already in motion. I should go see Arthur before dinner ends, Sarah said, standing. Say goodnight to him. Of course, Margaret said magnanimously. We'll have the car take you back to the hotel afterward. Sarah kissed Ryan's cheek, shook Margaret's hand, and walked calmly out of the dining room. But once she was out of sight, she moved quickly. Marcus was waiting in the hotel lobby when she arrived, laptop open and fingers flying across the keyboard. Tell me you got something, Sarah said. Better than something. I got everything. Marcus turned the laptop screen toward her, showing a series of financial transactions that made Sarah's heart race. Vanessa Cole has been systematically draining Mitchell Technologies for 18 months, but not into random offshore accounts, into accounts belonging to shell companies owned by Victoria Cross. Who's Victoria Cross? A professional con artist wanted by the FBI for defrauding wealthy men in 3 different states. She targets tech CEOs specifically, gets close to them through business relationships, then manipulates them into giving her access to company funds. Sarah stared at the screen. So Ryan really is a victim too, in a way. But here's the beautiful part. Victoria Cross, aka Vanessa Cole, has been recording every conversation she's had with Ryan for the past year. Insurance policy in case things went bad. Recording what kinds of conversations? Marcus smiled grimly. Conversations where Ryan explicitly discusses divorcing you after Arthur is born. Conversations where he talks about having you declared mentally incompetent. Conversations where he and his mother plan to use Arthur's medical needs to force you into compliance. Sarah felt hope blooming in her chest for the first time in weeks. Where are these recordings? That's where it gets interesting. Victoria Cross disappeared 3 days ago, right around the time the financial evidence vanished, but she left something behind. Marcus opened another file, and Sarah heard her husband's voice clearly. Once the baby's born and Sarah's recovered, we'll gradually phase her out. The postpartum depression angle gives us perfect cover. She'll seem unstable, unfit to raise Arthur. Mother thinks 6 months in Switzerland should be enough to establish a pattern. Vanessa's voice responded. And then what? She just accepts losing her son. She'll get visitation rights, supervised, of course, and enough money to live comfortably as long as she stays quiet. If she doesn't, we have medical records showing mental instability. No court would award custody to someone with documented psychiatric issues. What about me? What's my role in your new life? You'll be Arthur's stepmother eventually. We'll wait a respectable amount of time, then marry quietly. You understand business? You understand my world? Unlike Sarah, you'll be a true partner. The recording continued, with Ryan and Vanessa discussing details of their plan with casual cruelty. Sarah's medical information, Arthur's care, even the timing of Margaret's threats, all orchestrated months in advance. There are 12 hours of recordings, Marcus said. Everything you need to prove premeditated fraud, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping of your son. Where did these come from? Victoria Cross sent them to the FBI as part of a plea bargain. She's confessing to her role in the financial crimes in exchange for witness protection. Apparently, she got spooked when she realized how far the Mitchell family was willing to go to control you. Sarah felt dizzy with relief and rage. So Ryan's going to be arrested first thing tomorrow morning. Federal charges for conspiracy and fraud. Margaret, too, for her role in the cover-up. What about Arthur? That's where your recording from tonight comes in. Combined with Victoria's evidence, you have more than enough to prove that Arthur was never at risk from you. The Mitchell family has been systematically planning to separate you from your son since before he was born. Sarah thought about Ryan and Margaret, probably still at dinner, congratulating themselves on their successful manipulation of a traumatized mother. They thought they'd won, thought Sarah was broken and compliant. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. When do we move? Elena's filing emergency motions tonight. By morning, you'll have temporary custody and a restraining order against the Mitchell family. And Sarah, yes, Arthur's being transferred to Presbyterian Hospital under the care of Dr. Maria Santos, one of the best neonatologists in the country. The FBI is paying for his care during the investigation. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt like she could breathe freely. Her son would be safe, her husband would face justice, and she would finally be free of the Mitchell family's control. But as she prepared for the final confrontation, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was almost too easy. The Mitchell family had been playing this game for generations. Would they really be defeated this simply? She was about to find out. The FBI arrested Ryan Mitchell at 6 a.m. in the penthouse he'd shared with Sarah, agents flooding through the same front door where she'd once believed she was living a fairy tale. Sarah watched from across the street, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, as her husband was led away in handcuffs. Margaret Mitchell was arrested simultaneously at her Park Avenue mansion, the society matriarch's composure finally cracking as photographers captured her perp walk. The woman who'd threatened Sarah with exile and financial ruin looked small and frail as she was placed in the back of a federal vehicle. How does it feel? Jake asked, joining Sarah on the sidewalk as the last FBI van disappeared into Manhattan traffic. Hollow, Sarah said honestly. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but mostly I just feel sad. Sad for them, sad for the time I wasted believing in something that was never real. Arthur was thriving in his new hospital, under the care of Dr. Santos, who treated Sarah like a partner in her son's recovery rather than a problem to be managed. The FBI had seized all Mitchell Technologies assets pending investigation, but they'd also established a trust fund for Arthur's ongoing medical needs, funded by the money Victoria Cross had agreed to return as part of her plea bargain. Everything should have been perfect. Sarah had her son, her freedom, and enough money to build whatever life she wanted. Ryan and Margaret faced years in federal prison. Justice had been served. So why couldn't Sarah shake the feeling that something was still wrong? The answer came 3 days later, when Elena called with news that made Sarah's blood run cold. They're claiming mental incompetence. Who is Ryan's lawyers? They're arguing that he was psychologically manipulated by Victoria Cross, that his actions weren't criminal, but the result of expert psychological manipulation by a professional con artist. Sarah felt the victory she'd been celebrating start to crumble. Can they do that? It's a legitimate defense strategy. If they can prove Ryan was as much a victim as you were, he could avoid prison time entirely. But we have the recordings. The recordings prove he planned to have you committed and take custody of Arthur. But if his lawyers can argue he was being manipulated into those plans by a master manipulator, it becomes a very different case. Sarah sank into a chair, Arthur sleeping peacefully in her arms. What about Margaret? She's claiming she was trying to protect the family from what she perceived as a genuine threat to Arthur's well-being. The mother-in-law concerned about her son's wife's mental health after a traumatic birth. That's insane. It's also potentially effective. Sarah, there's something else. Victoria Cross was found dead in federal custody last night. Apparent suicide. The room seemed to tilt around Sarah. How is that possible? She was in witness protection. She left a note claiming guilt over the damage she'd caused to innocent families. Without her testimony, our case becomes much more difficult to prove. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. Every time she thought she'd won, every time she believed she was safe, another trap opened beneath her feet. What does this mean for Arthur and me? It means we need to be prepared for Ryan and Margaret to be released on bail. It means they'll probably avoid serious prison time, and it means they'll likely regain access to their frozen assets. Can they come after Arthur again? Not directly. The restraining orders are still in place. But Sarah, they still have resources we can't match. If they're determined to regain control of their grandson, they'll find a way. Sarah held Arthur closer, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest. She'd fought so hard to protect him, sacrificed everything to ensure his safety. And now the people who tried to destroy her were likely to escape consequences entirely. That night, alone in her hotel room with Arthur sleeping in a portable crib beside her bed, Sarah made a decision that would have been impossible for the woman she'd been 6 months ago. She called Marcus. I need you to find me someone who can create new identities. The kind of person who can make Sarah and Arthur Mitchell disappear completely. Sarah, think about what you're asking. That's illegal. It's dangerous. And it means you can never come back. Coming back to what a legal system that protects wealthy criminals, a society where money matters more than justice? You won the case. The truth came out. Ryan and Margaret are probably going to walk free. They'll have their money back, their reputation partially restored, and they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to prove I'm an unfit mother. Sarah looked at Arthur, so peaceful in sleep, unaware that his future was being decided by people who saw him as either an asset or a weapon. I can't fight them forever. Marcus, they have generational wealth, political connections, and a legal system designed to protect people like them. I have whatever money Victoria Cross returned and a son who needs protection. Where would you go? Somewhere they can't find us. Somewhere Arthur can grow up without being a pawn in their games. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, if you do this, you can never see Jake again. You can never contact anyone from your old life. You'll be truly alone. I won't be alone. I'll have Arthur. And if they find you, then at least I'll have given him some years of freedom. Some time to be a child instead of a Mitchell heir. The next morning, Jake arrived at the hotel with news that confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Ryan and Margaret had been released on bail, their lawyers having successfully argued that they posed no flight risk due to their deep community ties and business obligations. They can't contact you or Arthur directly, Jake said. But Sarah, Margaret has already hired a new legal team. They're planning to challenge the custody arrangements, claiming the FBI investigation was based on fabricated evidence from a deceased criminal. How long do we have? Maybe a week before they file new motions? Maybe less. Sarah nodded, her decision crystallizing. Jake, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions. What asterisk I need you to forget you ever had a sister named Sarah. Jake stared at her for a long moment, then looked at Arthur sleeping in his carrier. Where are you going? I can't tell you. But someday, if it's safe, I'll find a way to let you know we're okay. Sarah, there has to be another way. There isn't. The system failed us. Jake, the people with money and power always win, and Arthur will never be safe as long as he's a Mitchell. Jake pulled Sarah into a fierce hug, both of them crying. I love you, Rosie. I love you both so much. I love you too. Take care of yourself. And Jake, yeah, don't try to find us. Promise me. I promise. That afternoon, Sarah Mitchell and her son Arthur checked out of their hotel and vanished into the 8 million anonymous faces of New York City. By evening, they were in a car driving west with new names, new identification, and enough money to start over somewhere the Mitchell family's influence couldn't reach. Sarah looked in the rearview mirror one last time at the Manhattan skyline, then turned her attention to the road ahead. Somewhere out there was a place where Arthur could grow up free, where Sarah could rebuild herself into whoever she chose to be. The woman who'd been destroyed by betrayal was gone. The woman driving west with her son was someone new, someone stronger, Someone who'd learned that sometimes justice wasn't about punishment. Sometimes justice was simply the freedom to start again. 2 years later, Sarah Chen lived in a small coastal town in Oregon where the biggest scandal was whether the high school should replace its 40-year-old football scoreboard. She worked as a marketing consultant for local businesses, had a vegetable garden behind her rental house, and every morning she walked on the beach with her son Daniel, who was learning to chase seagulls and collect shells. To everyone in Cannon Beach, she was a single mother who'd moved from California after a difficult divorce. She was friendly but private, hardworking but never ostentatious. She drove a 10-year-old Honda, shopped at the local grocery store, and attended PTA meetings at Daniel's preschool. No one suspected that Sarah Chen was once Sarah Mitchell, that Daniel had been born Arthur Mitchell, or that they were both living under carefully constructed identities that had cost $50,000 and required them to never contact anyone from their previous lives. Sarah had kept that promise for 24 months. She'd resisted the urge to Google news about Ryan and Margaret Mitchell, hadn't tried to contact Jake, hadn't even looked at social media for fear of leaving digital traces. She and Daniel existed in a bubble of carefully maintained anonymity. But on a rainy Tuesday in March, that bubble burst. Sarah was at the grocery store with Daniel when she saw a familiar face on the cover of a tabloid magazine. Ryan Mitchell, looking older and thinner than she remembered, walking out of what appeared to be a courthouse. The headline read, "Tech CEO cleared in fraud case. Jury finds Mitchell victim of con artist." With shaking hands, Sarah bought the magazine and read the article in her car, while Daniel napped in his car seat. Ryan and Margaret Mitchell had been acquitted of all charges. Victoria Cross's death had eliminated the prosecution's key witness, and the defense had successfully argued that the Mitchell family had been victims of an elaborate con game. The jury had apparently believed that Ryan's recorded conversations with Victoria were evidence of his manipulation, not his guilt. The article quoted Margaret Mitchell. "This has been a terrible ordeal for our family. We lost our daughter-in-law and grandson to a web of lies spun by a criminal mastermind. We can only hope that someday Sarah will realize she was as much a victim as we were and allow us back into Arthur's life." Sarah felt sick reading the sanitized version of events that painted her as a confused woman who'd fled with their grandson rather than face the truth about Victoria Cross's manipulation. The Mitchell family had successfully rewritten history, casting themselves as the wrong parties in a story of financial crime and family dissolution. But what terrified Sarah most was the last paragraph of the article. "The Mitchell family has retained prominent private investigation firm Blake Associates to locate Sarah and Arthur Mitchell. We just want to know our grandson is safe and healthy." Margaret Mitchell told reporters, "Family is everything, and we won't stop searching until we're reunited." Blake Associates. Sarah recognized the name. They were the best missing persons investigators in the country, specialists in finding people who didn't want to be found. If the Mitchell family had hired them, her carefully constructed life in Oregon was in serious danger. That night, after Daniel was asleep, Sarah called Marcus from a disposable phone she'd bought for emergencies. "Jesus, Sarah, is that really you? We thought you were dead. I need to know how much danger we're in." "Where are you? I can't tell you that." "What's the situation with the Mitchell family?" Marcus sighed heavily. "They won. Sarah. Complete acquittal, reputation restored, fortune intact. They're claiming you were brainwashed by Victoria Cross and kidnapped Arthur to protect him from imaginary threats." "What about Jake?" "He's been questioned multiple times by Blake Associates. They think he knows where you are, but he's held firm. Says he hasn't heard from you since you disappeared." Sarah felt a wave of love for her brother, still protecting her even though her disappearance had probably broken his heart. "How close are they to finding us closer than you'd like?" "Blake Associates has been systematically checking every hospital where a woman matching your description gave birth to a premature baby around Arthur's birthday. They're looking for identity documents, medical records, anything that might trace back to you. How much time do we have? Maybe weeks, maybe days." "Sarah, you need to run again." Sarah looked through her kitchen window at the small town that had become home, the place where Daniel had taken his first steps, where she'd finally felt safe enough to sleep through the night without nightmares. "I can't keep running forever. Then you need to come back and fight. With what they have, unlimited resources and a legal system that's already proven it won't hold them accountable." You have the truth. The truth doesn't matter when the other side can afford to rewrite it. Sarah ended the call and sat in her kitchen, wrestling with an impossible choice. Run again. Tear Daniel away from everything familiar. Live in constant fear of discovery, or stand and fight a battle she'd already lost once against opponents who'd only grown stronger. The next morning brought her answer in the form of a black sedan parked across from Daniel's preschool. Sarah recognized the surveillance technique, had seen it used against other targets during her previous life in Manhattan. Blake Associates had found them. Sarah picked up Daniel early, claiming he had a doctor's appointment, and drove home with her heart pounding. She had perhaps hours before they moved from surveillance to contact, hours to decide whether to run or surrender. As she packed emergency bags with practiced efficiency, Sarah thought about the past 2 years of freedom. Daniel had learned to walk on the beach where they'd spent countless mornings. He'd grown from a fragile preemie into a healthy, laughing toddler who chased dogs and loved storytime at the library. He deserved better than a life of running and hiding. He deserved to grow up without fear, to have friends and stability and all the normal experiences of childhood. But he also deserved to be free from the Mitchell family's toxic influence, their need to control and possess and manipulate. Sarah looked at her son, playing contentedly with blocks on their living room floor, oblivious to the danger circling their small haven. She'd sacrificed everything to give him these 2 years of peace. Now she had to decide what she was willing to sacrifice next. The doorbell rang, and Sarah knew her time had run out. Through the window, she could see 2 professionally dressed people on her porch, probably Blake Associates investigators ready to inform her that the game was over. Sarah picked up Daniel and held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, memorizing the weight of him in her arms. Whatever happened next, these 2 years of freedom had been worth everything she'd given up to gain them. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Sarah opened the door to face her past. The woman standing on Sarah's porch wasn't from Blake Associates. She was younger, maybe 30, with tired eyes and the kind of nervous energy that comes from carrying dangerous secrets. Sarah Mitchell, I'm sorry, you must have the wrong house. I'm Sarah Chen. I know who you are. My name is Amanda Cross. Victoria Cross was my sister. Sarah's world tilted. Victoria Cross, the woman who'd manipulated Ryan and then allegedly committed suicide in federal custody, had a sister, and that sister was standing on Sarah's doorway, holding a manila envelope that looked thick enough to contain a life's worth of secrets. I need to talk to you. It's about my sister's death and about the Mitchell family. Sarah hesitated, Daniel still in her arms, her packed emergency bag sitting just inside the door. Everything in her cautioned against trusting anyone connected to the woman who'd nearly destroyed her life. But Amanda Cross looked genuinely frightened, and the envelope in her hands suggested she might have answers Sarah desperately needed. 5 minutes, Sarah said, stepping aside. Amanda entered the small living room, her eyes immediately fixing on Daniel. He's beautiful. He looks like the pictures my sister showed me. Victoria showed you pictures of my son. She showed me everything. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence she collected while she was embedded with the Mitchell family. Sarah felt her pulse accelerate. I thought all of that was destroyed when she died. That's what everyone thinks. But Victoria didn't trust anyone, not even the FBI. She kept copies of everything hidden in places only I knew about. Amanda opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers, USB drives, and photographs. Sarah recognized some of the images Ryan with Victoria in Mexico. Financial documents showing the embezzled funds, transcripts of recorded conversations. But there were other things too. Documents Sarah had never seen before. This is a forensic analysis of my sister's death, Amanda said, handing Sarah a medical examiner's report. She didn't commit suicide. She was murdered. Sarah stared at the document, which conclusively proved that Victoria Cross had been killed in federal custody and her death staged to look like suicide. The Mitchell family has connections everywhere, Amanda continued. Federal marshals, judges, medical examiners. My sister thought she was safe in witness protection. But there is no protection from people with that much money and influence. Why are you telling me this? Because Victoria wasn't the monster everyone thinks she was. Yes, she was a con artist who targeted wealthy men, but she had reasons. Amanda pulled out another document, this one much older, a newspaper clipping from 15 years earlier about a teenage girl named Victoria Cross, who'd been sexually assaulted by a wealthy businessman. The case had been dismissed when the businessman's lawyers proved the girl had a history of lying and petty theft. The system failed her when she was 17, Amanda said quietly, so she decided to make her own justice. She only targeted men who'd hurt women and used their wealth to escape consequences. Sarah thought about Ryan's casual cruelty, his systematic plan to have her declared mentally incompetent and steal their son. Victoria Cross had been a criminal, but she'd been fighting monsters. There's more, Amanda said, including evidence that the Mitchell family knew about your investigation from the very beginning. They had someone feeding them information about every move you made. Dr. Thompson. We already figured that out. Not just Dr. Thompson. Someone much closer to you. Amanda handed Sarah a series of phone records and bank deposits. Sarah scanned them, her heart sinking as she recognized a familiar pattern of payments. Elena Vasquez, the divorce attorney Sarah had trusted with her life, had been on the Mitchell family payroll for months before Sarah had even hired her. My lawyer betrayed me, asterisk. The Mitchell family didn't just buy your doctor, they bought your lawyer too. Every strategy session, every piece of evidence, every plan you made was reported directly to Margaret Mitchell. Sarah felt the last of her faith in the legal system crumble. The woman she'd trusted to fight for her rights had been working for the enemy all along, feeding Sarah false hope while ensuring she could never actually win. Elena orchestrated the whole thing, the fake financial evidence that disappeared, the perfectly timed witness deaths, even your decision to run. They wanted you to flee with Arthur so they could claim you'd kidnapped him. Then why haven't they taken him back? Because Victoria left them a poison pill. Before she died, she sent copies of everything to 12 different news organizations with instructions to publish it all if anything happened to you or Arthur. Amanda pulled out a final document, this one bearing the letterhead of the New York Times. This is a letter from their investigative team. They've been working on the Mitchell family story for 8 months, corroborating everything Victoria documented. They're publishing next week. Sarah stared at the letter, hardly daring to believe what she was reading. A full exposé of the Mitchell family's corruption, their connections to corrupt officials, their systematic abuse of the legal system to silence victims. The FBI has also reopened the investigation based on Victoria's hidden evidence. Real federal agents this time, not ones on the Mitchell payroll. Ryan and Margaret were arrested again this morning. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into a chair, Daniel still in her arms. After 2 years of running, 2 years of looking over her shoulder, it was finally over. What does this mean for me and Daniel? It means you're free. The Mitchell family's assets are frozen again. Their political connections are being investigated, and they're facing charges for murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. They'll never be able to hurt you again. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in years, they were tears of relief rather than fear or rage. There's one more thing, Amanda said softly. My sister left you something. She handed Sarah a letter written in careful handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I'm dead and my sister found you. I know you have every reason to hate me, but I want you to know that everything I did was to protect you and Arthur from people who would have destroyed you both. The Mitchell family represents everything wrong with our system, everything that fails people like you and me. I'm sorry I couldn't find a cleaner way to fight them, but they only understand power. And sometimes power requires getting dirty. Take care of your son. He's lucky to have a mother willing to sacrifice everything for his freedom. Victoria Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at Amanda. What happens now? Now you get to choose your own life. You can stay Sarah Chen in Oregon, or you can reclaim your real identity. The legal system that failed you before is finally working, and the people who tried to destroy you are facing justice. Sarah looked around the small house that had been her sanctuary for 2 years. She thought about the life she'd built here, the community that had welcomed her, the peace she'd found walking on the beach with Daniel every morning. Then she thought about Jake, probably still wondering if she was alive. She thought about the other women who might be facing their own versions of the Mitchell family's cruelty, women who needed to know that fighting back was possible. I think, Sarah said slowly, it's time for Sarah Mitchell to come back. 3 months later, Sarah stood in a federal courtroom in Manhattan, holding Daniel's hand as Ryan and Margaret Mitchell were sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge's words about corruption and abuse of power washed over her, But what mattered was the finality of it. It was over. Outside the courthouse, Jake was waiting with tears in his eyes and arms wide open. Sarah ran to him, Daniel between them, finally allowing herself to believe they were safe. "I thought I'd lost you forever," Jake whispered. "You never lost me. I just had to find myself first." That evening, Sarah appeared on the evening news. No longer hiding behind false names or careful anonymity, she spoke about corruption in the legal system, about the need to protect victims of powerful predators, about the strength it took to fight back when the system failed. "Every woman facing an impossible situation needs to know that you are not powerless," she said directly to the camera. "The system may be rigged against us, but truth has a power that money can't buy. And sometimes, if you're willing to sacrifice everything to protect what matters most, you can win." 6 months later, Sarah opened the doors of the Cross Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women escape abusive relationships with wealthy, powerful men. Funded by the assets seized from the Mitchell family and named in honor of Victoria Cross, the foundation provided legal aid, safe housing, and identity protection for women who needed to disappear. Sarah had learned that sometimes justice wasn't about punishment. Sometimes justice was simply giving people the tools to build better lives, free from the people who tried to control them. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you discovered that the life you built from the ashes of betrayal was stronger and more beautiful than anything you'd lost. Standing in her foundation's offices, watching lawyers and counselors help women reclaim their lives, Sarah finally understood what victory looked like. It wasn't about revenge or seeing your enemies punished, though that had its place. Real victory was the freedom to choose your own story, to protect the people you loved, and to help others find their own strength in the darkest moments. Sarah Mitchell had learned to fight, and now she was teaching others to do the same. The fairy tale was over, but the real story was just beginning. Sarah's story proves that no matter how powerless you feel, no matter how wealthy or connected your oppressors are, truth has a way of surfacing. But her victory wasn't just personal. It created a foundation that continues to help women escape impossible situations every single day. Stories like Sarah's need to be told. They need to be shared, because somewhere out there, another woman is sitting in a hospital bed wondering why her husband isn't answering his phone. Another mother is questioning whether she's going crazy or if the people she trusts really are working against her. If Sarah's courage inspired you, if her fight for justice gave you hope, hit that like button right now. Your engagement helps YouTube show this story to people who might desperately need to hear it. And here's something powerful you can do. Share this video with someone you care about, not because you think they're in Sarah's situation, but because knowledge is protection. The more people understand how financial abuse works, how powerful families manipulate the system, how gaslighting operates, the harder it becomes for predators to succeed. Drop a comment telling us what part of Sarah's story impacted you most. Was it her moment of realization in the hospital? Her decision to fight back the revelation about Victoria's true identity? Your thoughts create a community of survivors and supporters that extends far beyond this video. Subscribe to our channel if you believe in stories that matter. We're committed to bringing you real drama that doesn't just entertain, it educates, it empowers, and it reminds us all that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. Turn on notifications, because next week we're sharing the story of Marcus Webb, the private investigator who helped Sarah uncover the truth. His investigation revealed corruption that reaches the highest levels of American society, and what he discovered will shock you. Remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more powerful than anyone who tries to control you. Until next time, keep fighting for the truth.